Hello and welcome back to my Bloomburrow set review. Today we're talking about the black cards and how good I think they're going to be in limited. I'm going to be using these tiers to do so. If you haven't been here before, these are the tiers I use. They're a little different from the way other people evaluate cards in limited, but I kind of like them. They're a little more generic. They allow a little more room for maneuvering, a little more room for discussion. There's some broad things to talk about, but hopefully we're going to be a little bit more positive this episode after the blue cards, which were maybe the most negative I've ever been in a set review. So let's get started. A Gateblade Assassin. 1 and a black for a 1/3 when it attacks, defending player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So 2-mana 1/3s tend to be pretty bad. Like that stat line is bad unless there's mitigating circumstances like there were in AFR, or not AFR, LTR. But when you have an ability like this that drains your opponent for 1 every time it attacks, that's like, I don't know, I was tempted to put this in tier 2 because I really do like the idea. The problem is that you do have to block sometimes, and this doesn't really block anything ever. So that's the concern. This is like an aggressive card. It works well in the life gain deck, or the life changing deck, I guess. And I don't know. Like the ability is powerful. I'm just worried. This is kind of like the stat line you would want on this creature. Like if you were going to make this creature any stat line for 2 mana, like you'd probably rather it be a 3/1, but I still think this is probably the second best. I think this is better than a 2/2 with ability. I don't know. It's kind of interesting to debate that, but as is, I think this is playable and good, but I don't think it's like amazing or anything. I kind of want to be wrong. I kind of want that card to be good. Bandit's Talent. 1 and a black for a Calas enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards 2 cards unless they discard an online card. You can pay black at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep. If that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 2 life. And you can pay 3 and a black at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card for each opponent who has 1 or fewer cards in hand. So the nice thing about this, obviously, is that you can activate the modes. Like, you just play the first mode, and you're getting a 1-for-1, or your opponent's discarding 2 lands, which is probably way better for you. So be advised, if your opponent casts this, just discard a spell. Like, don't discard 2 lands unless you have, like, 5 lands in your hand. Don't just let them 2-for-1 you for free. We've seen this kind of effect before, where, like, once your opponent gets low on cards, at some point you just pay the black, and they can't play all the cards from their hand. Now, in some matchups that's going to be terrible, but even you can just not pay it. That's the thing. It's like you can just, in some matches, and I think in the average game of limited, you're going to be able to pay that black mana to level it up once, and it's only 1 mana. And then it's kind of like your opponent. If your opponent top picks a card, they're like, well, I need to play this card to live, but I'm also losing 2 life every time I do that. So yeah, like this. That type of effect I think is a little bit better than it looks, because it's the beginning of their upkeep before they draw, so if they have 1 card in their hand, like this still hits them. And you're making it more likely that they have fewer cards in hand because you're discarding. And again, so like don't discard 2 cards against this, but in most games of limited, you're going to be discarding, you're going to be getting down to 1 or 2 cards in your hand at some point during the game, so like it's going to just be tough to not have this be on. Obviously the upgrade to level 3 mode I don't think is super relevant, but when you do it, like again, it's like your opponent is just going to be like, I can't cast my spells, and that puts you in a good spot. Bonebind Orator. 1 and a black for a 2/2, you can pay 3 and a black to exile it from your graveyard, return another target creature from your graveyard to your hand. So we had this type of effect before, and DMU. Now, the reason that card was I think better than this card is that it milled like when it enters battlefield, so it was enabled itself, so it played well with itself because you wouldn't bill it its own comes into the graveyard. Also, it was a 3 mana 3/1. A 3 mana 3/1 is a better stat line on this type of creature than 2 mana 2/2 is, in my opinion, because it doesn't really matter how much toughness it has if you want it to die, and like the 3 power really is kind of the magic number for like doing something in combat. Or like 2/2s you can kind of just ignore once you get to turn 4, but 3/1s tend to stick around and provide like whatever. So I'm grading this a tier lower than that card. Now I graded that card as tier 4, and it ended up being like a tier 3 card. But I still have sort of the same doubts about like, well, this one doesn't even enable itself, and yes, there's some ways to discard stuff for value in the set, and there are ways to mill, obviously, surveil, but it's just kind of like I don't think it's enough. I don't know. I guess to make this good. Bone Cache Overseer, single black mana for a 1/1. You can pay 1 life and draw a card. Activate only if 3 or more cards left your graveyard this turn, or if you've sacrificed a food this turn. So, this really wants you to be sacrificing food, like foraging, basically. If you forage, you get to pay 1 life to draw a card in your 1-drop. That's really good. The thing is, this is very easy to deal with. I don't know. I have it low. If you activate the ability once, the card is good. But, like, I guess if you frame it as 1 mana, 1/1, suspend, pay 1 life, draw a card. Like, suspend 1 or 2 or something. Because then, like, on turn 1, you're not going to be able to do this until turn 3, probably at the earliest. So your opponent could deal with it, or they could just let you have it and get 1 life. Now, if you get to do it 2 turns in a row, you're in a great spot. But I don't know. I think this is fine, but I'm kind of wary of it maybe not being amazing. It does need help. It incentivizes you to do things that you already want to do, which is nice. It is a card that only really goes in the deck that wants it, but people may not think that, so that concerns me. So, yeah, I'm gonna start in tier 3. We'll see how that ends up going. Coiling Rebirth. 3 black for a sorcery. Gift a card. Return target creature from the graveyard to the battlefield. Then, if the gift was promised and the creature isn't legendary, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a 1/1. So you can offspring it essentially, if you want. Now you're giving your opponent a card when you do that, so that's probably almost never worth it, but you could do it. I mean, we're back to here on these type of reanimate effects. We had a couple of good ones in a row. We're now back to double pipped, and it also doesn't give you additional value, so not excited about this one. It's just like these 5-mana reanimates just aren't really good by themselves, and they need help to like be functional. So I don't really like. I just don't see it. I'm not buying it. Consumed by Greed. 1 black for an instant, you gift a card. Target opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. If the gift was promised, return target creature from your graveyard to your hand. So the removal spell side of this is fine, but probably not amazing. It's 3 mana, double pipped for like a worse murder. Now, the upside is, if you have something really, really good, you can give your opponent a card and get back your bomb or whatever. So that's like the upside, and for that upside, I'm bumping it from tier 4 to tier 3 because I think the removal spell by itself is not very good and like a little bit playable card, but not super exciting. I'm giving it a little bit of a bump due to flexibility, like due to having this other mode that's like, yeah, I mean, I'm giving my opponent a card, but I'm getting back probably a better card from my graveyard. Which will happen. Not 0% of the time, but like I think it's probably closer to you're going to be casting this without a gift 80% of the time, which I think is true for most of the gift cards. So I don't know. That's what I have skepticism about the gift mechanic, is all I'm saying. Cruel Claw's Heist. Black for a sorcery. You can gift a card. Target opponent reveals their hand. You may choose a non-land card from it. Exile that card. If the gift was promised, you may cast the card for as long as it remains exiled, and spend mana of any type to cast it. So this might be too low. Here's the thing. First of all, it's double pipped. So before I even get into the like details of the actual card, the double pip means that you're not going to be able to cast this on 2 very often, like very rarely. So your Thoughtseize effect gets worse the later the game goes, because it's less likely to hit your opponent's best card. And it means you have to play off curve, which isn't good. So with those are sort of big factors as to why I don't think this is good. The actual, like, if this was 1 in a black, I'd be more like, it would be kind of an interesting card to debate, because like how strong it is, because they do draw the card before you get to look at their hand, so you do actually get to get their best card, including the one that they draw from the gift, which, you know, means that you'll get to you're not actually going down a card when you gift them something with this card. So like paying the gift is actually good on this card. The reason this is in tier 4 primarily is that it's black. If you're in mono black, I think you could play this and it would be pretty good. Like probably tier 2 in mono black maybe, but just really hard to cast, and I think that people, like, it just is not, this card isn't going to perform well. It may be okay, like there are going to be spots where you may want it, but I don't think in aggregate you're going to want it very often. Daggerfang Duo, 2 and a black for a 3/2 Death Touch. When it enters, you may mill 2 cards. Yeah, I mean, this looks like a solid enabler to me. Notably, pretty much, like, every single black creature has Death Touch, so, like, I don't know. That's something to think about. Like, not all, obviously not every single one, but, like, there are a lot of Death Touch in black in this set. Especially at, like, common. So, I mean, I don't know. 3 mana, 3/2, Death Touch, ETB, mill 2. I kind of just like, on its face, just the milling 2. Like, black really cares about having stuff in its graveyard in this set for Forage and for Threshold, no matter what black deck you're playing. It's kind of like a gluey card. It does trade with anything. It's just kind of really annoying on the board. It has at least 2, like, 2 toughness is actually kind of big, because, I mean, there is stuff that deals 2, but there's some stuff that deals 1, so at least getting to 2 toughness is nice. You do kind of wish this was a 2/3. Like, I kind of, like, if it was a 2/3, I'd be, like, more excited about it, but I think this is fine. Darkstar Augur. 2 and a black for a 2/3 with Offspring for a single black. It has flying. At the beginning of your upkeep, you reveal the top card of your library and put that card in your hand. You lose life equal to its mana value. So this is Bob. For those of you who remember, those of you familiar with Bob. Bob is very good in limited. It's not as good in traditional limited as it is in, like, Vintage Cube. Vintage Cube Bob is, like, one of the best black cards if you're, you know, a Matt Grenier disciple like myself. Believes, like, you know, mid-range is kind of the thing. In a lot of spots, like in a lot of decks, Bob is very, very good in Vintage Cube. And in limited, it's still very good. This one has flying, too. The real interesting thing about this card is whether or not you're supposed to actually pay the Offspring, because you might just lose the game due to taking, like, 18 damage. And obviously the answer is it depends, but I don't know. I think there's going to be enough, like, food and other stuff in the set that allows you to gain life in black that you're probably just going to want to make the second Bob, because your opponent's, because you hit lands 50% of the time ish, like 45% of the time. You're 45% to hit a land. So you're, on average, every turn, you're pretty much getting, and, like, the average mana value of cards in your deck is like 2.5 on average, something like that. So on average, you're taking like 3 damage a turn, something like that. So somewhere in that neighborhood of damage per turn to draw 2 cards. That's a lot. Like that, like you're taking a lot of damage, but you're getting a lot of cards. There's lots of ways to gain life in this set, especially in, like, black-white. So I think you do actually want to be making 2 guys, and this is, like, it's 3 power in the air. It's like you're dealing 3 to your opponents with flyers every turn. So, like, as a race goes, like, you can't, like, it's kind of a little bit of a build around in the sense that you don't want to be playing, like, 8 drops in your deck when you have this. But I think it's just gonna, like, if you just play it as a 3 mana 2/3 flyer that is Bob, it's nuts. So I think in most spots, it's I think in most spots, like, even if you just play as 3 mana 2/3 flyer, like, you're just gonna be happy about it. Like, it's just good. I think it's a must kill threat. You get into these weird game states where on turn 4 you play 2 of them and your opponent's like, what do I do? And, like, that's actually kind of a good, like, generally that's a good spot to put your opponents in, is like, do I have to kill this thing that's going to draw them, like, 8 cards, or do I not kill it? And that's a good spot to be in. Dire Sight. 2 and a black for a sorcery, surveil 2, then draw 2 cards, you lose 2 life. So you're getting to see a maximum of 4 cards here. You're very incentivized in black to just put the 2 cards, like, just put the 2 cards in the graveyard, no matter what they are. Like, it has to be pretty dang good for you not to be putting the cards in the yard. Like, I really like this card. Like, I like it a lot. I just don't think it's going to perform very well, even though it, like, there's just lots of ways to get value for, like, losing. Like, there's just lots of ways to lose life in black, you know? Like, there's just lots of ways to do that. I don't think you necessarily need to, I mean, I guess when I think about it, right, 4 mana for this effect. You know, I'll bump this up a tier. Hold on, I'm gonna bump this up 1 tier. So what I thought about the bump this up a tier for me is, again, in sets we paid, and in this set there's a 4 mana scry 2, draw 2 for 4, and, like, we're okay with paying for like a, you know, I think that's usually an instant, but nonetheless, like that value is pretty good. Now you do have to lose 2. Like this effect has been tier 3 before. Again, sort of looking at like DMU as sort of an example of this kind of effect being good. There's life change stuff and like getting this, like black really does want to put the cards in the graveyard, so this puts 3 cards in the graveyard if you put the 2 in, this one gets in there. Like I kind of like that. This kind of looks like the blood token one from Vow as well. Like it's kind of looks like it's like, oh, it's kind of actually doing enough to maybe be good or playable. Good and playable, different things. Downwind Ambusher. 3 and a black for a 4/2 flash. When it enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn, or you can destroy target creature an opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. I mean, this is sweet. This is a really sweet one. They've been experimenting with this sort of template of card, the like 4 mana thing that's big, that has like high power, low toughness, that, you know, kills something that's been dealt damage this turn. Is kind of an interesting design space. It sort of does a lot of like, it's a very flexible type of design, and I think this is another one they've kind of gotten right. I mean, there's just a lot of X1s in the format, and this will just kill an X1 for 4 and also to be traded with something. Like, that's just sick. There's like a non-zero chance that it kills a X1, eats a 1/1, because there's 1/1 tokens just everywhere. Like, there's a non-zero chance that happens with this card, and if that does happen, you're just really far ahead. And, you know, it's just, this to me just reads like, oh, this is just going to be a 2-for-1 every single time you cast it, and like, you can even take down big stuff, too. If you trump block and then do this, and it's like, it's a card that you can't really play around with the opponent, like this type of effect. Usually this type of effect you can play around to a certain extent, but this one I don't think you really can, so I like it. Early Winter. 4 and a black for an instant, choose 1, exile target creature, target opponent exiles an enchantment they control. So, 5 mana for a, you know, exile creature. Not what it used to be, and Theros Beyond Death, that was obviously a tier 3 card, maybe even a tier 2 card. We're not there anymore. And I think it's still fine. Like, I think it's still fine removal because exile is relevant, but in a set where you have a bunch of tokens, like every card is making 2 tokens, like I'm skeptical for that reason, and I'm skeptical that the enchantment piece. So when does black get to interact with enchantments? I don't know. Kind of a weird, I don't know, just a weird thing, but Feed the Cycle. 1 and a black for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, forage or pay black. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. Really like this. So it's a murder on its face that allows you to forage. This kind of reminds me, this is sort of like a bargain adjacent mechanic where like there are cards that care about you foraging. In the set where like when you forage something happens, or when you sacrifice a food, or when stuff leaves your graveyard, there's just enough of those, and like black and green specifically, that I think that this will be good. And like sometimes it's just like in the late game, if you don't care about those things, like if for whatever reason you're playing a black deck, like black red or something, and you just don't really care about the stuff in your graveyard, you can just have a 2 mana thing. Generally, these type of removal spells aren't, like, you don't really want to cast them on turn 2 anyway. Like, you generally don't want to be doing that, so not being 2 mana on turn 2 isn't a huge deal, usually. It kind of actually is like a little counterintuitive in that way. It obviously matters. There are cases where you're going to want it, but I think in most cases you're just going to be pretty happy to have this be 3 mana. Like, again, it's just like the worst case is murder, and then it has upside, so I'm happy about it. Fell. 1 and a black for sorcery, destroy target creature. So you'll notice that this card is rated a tier below the card before it, despite being cheaper usually on its face, and that's primarily due to it being a sorcery. Sorcery speed removal just takes a hit. This is a good card, obviously. It's a playable card. People are going to play it. It's going to be probably overdrafted, I would guess. Like, because it's not if this were an instant, it would obviously be nuts. Like, it would be really good. But I think being a sorcery is basically bumping it down an entire tier, because there's just so much like restrictions. Like, again, the efficiency is great. You're going to be happy about it, but yeah, it's just a removal spell. Just a removal spell. That's all it does. Glide Dive Duo. 4 and a black for a 3/3 flying. When it enters, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this archetype of card, the like drain your opponent for 2, generally is very good. And even though like this card looks kind of bad on rate, it's like a 5-mana 3/3 flyer. I think this is going to be enough that you're happy to play it. And a lot of your, like pretty much any black deck I think can play this. And I think in the life change deck, you're going to probably actively want 1 or 2 copies of it, because it's just kind of a fin, like it just kind of like it's unassuming, you know what I mean? Like it's unassuming how much this actually is, and like a 3/3 flyer for 5 is bad, but it's not so far, like a 4/4 flyer for 5 is usually good. So it's not so far off that, you know, you're like, it's crazy, you know? It's not so far off that it's like unplay, like you could conceivably win a game of Limited in which you played a 5-mana 3/3 flyer with no additional text on it. Like you could win a game in which you did that. Now, would you be likely to do that? Probably not. But could it happen? Yeah. This card does have additional text, and additional text is very good. So I actually like this card. It is a 5-drop, so we're not going to rate it too highly, but I do think that you are going to play this card. Hazel's Nocturne. 3 in a black for an instant, return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. So the joke with this obviously is that it, you know, drains your opponent for 2. Another card that like sneaky is like, oh, draining your opponent for 2, that's pretty good. Where it's like, this is 4 mana instant speed, do this effect that generally isn't very good, but then you staple drain your opponent for 2 on it, and it's like, I'm interested. I originally had this lower, and then I was like, no, I'm underestimating the drain your opponent for 2 part of the card. I still think, you know, it obviously is a card that still is just pure card advantage, needs to have stuff in the graveyard, but there's plenty of ways to mill stuff, like there's just a lot of ways to get stuff in the yard. And in black, as we've already sort of seen, I think you are going to play this. And I think most black decks would play this, would be my guess, or like, could play it, I guess. That's kind of my stance with the tier 3 grade. Husk Burster Swarm. 7 in a black for a 6/6. With Menace and Death Touch, it costs 1 less to cast for each creature card you own in exile and in your graveyard. So obviously it gets cheaper if you mill stuff and whatever. If you want to be very creature heavy, when you do this is definitely a build around worth doing. We've seen, again, this is another, like, we had this and the Tolarian Terror, and we have this in the blue card that's very similar to the ones from DMU. It's sort of, I wonder if it's the same design team, I don't know. I'm kind of getting those vibes. But, yeah, I mean, these type of cards tend to be, like this one, in DMU, this card was okay. It was 1 mana cheaper, didn't have Menace, and was a 5/5. And I think you're probably getting a little bit extra. I think this is probably better than that card. So, and that card was fine, but not amazing. This card I think is probably fine, but not like the best thing ever. It is sort of a deck. It's kind of its own deck. It's a cool build around, but you probably don't want to be all in on doing this thing. Iridescent Vine Lasher. Single black mana for a 1/2 with Offspring for 2. colorless. That has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to target opponent. So, I mean, on turn 1, you play a 1/2 with this ability, and it's just like, you're probably going to deal, if your opponent doesn't remove it, you're probably going to deal 4 damage to them over the next 4 turns with your 1 mana card. And like, if this gets in, that's even more. And then you can also just, on turn 3, play it, and then and you're going to get 4 damage over the next 2 turns, and it's kind of like on a damage race, it kind of evens out. But the fact that it's like changing life totals and stuff is the thing that, now it only, so, the life changing stuff only works on your life total, so that is something to think about. But I think this is just a solid one drop that's gonna do stuff. I don't think it's busted or anything, but I think it's solid, and we'll see a lot of play, I would guess. Alright, Masha It Feathers Knight. 3 black for a 6/5 flying trample. It has ward, discard a card. It also has a static ability, creatures your opponents control have base toughness 1. So, I mean, this card looks pretty impactful to me. Like, it's obviously a 5-mana 6/5 flying trample with like ward discarded cards, so you're gonna get like a 2-for-1 out of it. Pretty much no matter what. It has trample, cool. It also makes all your opponent's stuff smaller, and like this in some scenarios this will kill things. Like you can attack and then play this post combat, and then like their stuff dies. That's like a thing you can do with this. It's kind of like a play pattern you have to think about maybe. I don't know how good that play pattern is, but it's definitely a thing you can do. And it's just big. It's just a large flyer. I mean, tier 1 maybe is a little aggressive. It does seem like it's just going to be really hard to deal with and wins the game in like 3 turns. So I don't know. Not a whole lot to say about this thing. It's just a big flyer. Moonstone Harbinger. 2 and a black for a 1/3 flying death touch. When you gain or lose life during your turn, bats you control gain +1/+0 and gain death touch until end of turn. This ability triggers only once each turn. So 3 mana 1/3 flying death touch is pretty good. And like, I don't know, maybe I should move this down a little bit because maybe this is too high. Yeah, it probably is. It is kind of at the end of the day. But like, I don't know, a 3 mana 1/3 flying death. How good is a 3 mana 1/3 flying death touch? Well, it blocks literally everything in the game, and it does. I don't know. Actually, yeah, I think I'm gonna move this down a bit. It's good against like 2 drops that don't have 3 power. Opponent plays this on turn 3. How am I feeling? You're just not gonna have that many bats. Like, the thing is, you're just not gonna have that many. Like, you're gonna have some bats, but you're just not gonna have that many bats. But it's so easy to trigger, and this becomes a 2/3 on attacks, 2/3 flying for 3, which is not really very good. But it is death touch, and it pumps your whole team. Well, not your whole team, but probably like 1 creature. Yeah, I'm gonna move this down. I'm gonna move it down a bit. Yeah, I think tier 3 is closer to right on this. It's just one of those cards that like kind of reads well, but then I kind of look at it a little more and I'm like, okay, so 3 mana for a 1/3 flying death touch. It's like I just don't think that's that good. We just saw the Kami with that didn't have flying and had the ability to drain or whatever for 5 mana, and that was like a tier 4 card, and you basically only played it in blue black. And it was like okay, but I think this is better than that card, but I don't think it's like that much better. So I'm gonna leave it in tier 3 for now. Nocturnal Hunger. 2 to black for an instant, you gift a food. Destroy target creature. If the gift wasn't promised, you lose 2 life. So this is kind of interesting. It's a thing that interacts with your life total, which is sometimes desirable. You can gift something if you want to. Like, I don't know, this is kind of like a weird card. You probably just are going to be destroying something and losing 2 life most of the time, which isn't great unless you care about your life total changing, which does happen a lot. Like, there are a lot of cards in black that care about your life total changing. So I do think that in the decks where that is something you care about, you want this, or you'll play this. And decks where that's not something you care about. There's also some very, very minor gift synergies, but not a ton. So you're probably just going to be, 3 mana, destroy something, lose 2. Which isn't very good. But I do, like, there are decks where you could care about, where you care about the life loss, and that actually, like, I feel like there's, like, better ways to do that, though. You know? I think I'm gonna move this down, too. I think there's better removal, and I think there's better ways to do what this is doing. So, I'm actually gonna move this to tier 4. Being basically forced to lose 2 life to remove your opponent's stuff is really bad. And like, giving them a food is maybe worse in a lot of cases than losing 2 life. And so like, yeah, if your opponent's like beating you down, you give them a food and they don't really care about the food because, they're trying to aggro you out. But I don't know. I think there's better removal in the set, and I think this is not super premium, and so it's going to suffer as a result. Osteomancer Adept. 1 and a black for 2/2 death touch, and you can tap it until end of turn. You may cast creature spells from your graveyard by foraging, in addition to paying their other costs. If you cast a spell this way, it enters with the finality counter on it. Yeah, I mean, this is a good card. Another death touch creature in black. You can cast creature spells from your graveyard, really good, but generally an ability that gets overrated. forage. Like, this is just a good card. Like, it's a good card. It provides value. It is a 2-drop that dies to everything and all that. But like, it's a good 2-drop. You could put this in tier 1, and I wouldn't be like, oh man, you're crazy. But I think for me, I'm just gonna leave it in tier 2. Maybe it ends up being like super busted. I don't know. It's just people tend to really like these effects, and I don't know. They tend not to be as good as people think. Persistent Marsh Stalker. 1 in the black for a 3/1. It has +1/+0 for each other rat you control. And it has Threshold. Whenever you attack with 1 or more rats, if 7 or more cards are in your graveyard, you may pay 2 in a black and return this to the battlefield tapped and attacking. So, yeah, I mean, this is a solid recursive threat. You need rats for it to be really, really good, but you'll just play this as a 2-drop, and it'll be a good 2-drop, and then sometimes you'll get it in the graveyard, attack with a rat, bring it back. I think Threshold should be doable for black decks, but this is a card that you'll just play without it, which is why I kind of like it. Just seems like a good 2-drop to me. Psychic Whirl. 2 in a black for a sorcery. Just target opponent discards 2 cards, then if you control a rat, surveil 2. Not excited about this. If this just said they discard 2, use surveil 2, I think I would move it up a tier, but I'm not even 100% sure. And the fact that you need to have a rat to do that, just not exciting at all. You can play a Mind Rot if you like. Mind Rot is never like an atrociously bad card, and you can play it, and it is good in some scenarios, and in some formats it's better than others. I think this format could be one. Like if you're playing that like the case thing that makes your that cares about your opponent having few cards in their hand, like maybe this is a thing that you want to do. But I'm just not. There's just other ways to do this usually. Ravine Raider. Single black mana for a 1/1 menace. You can pay 1 in a black to give it +1/+1 until end of turn. Yeah, I mean, we've seen like 1/1 menace is actually a stat line, like 1 mana 1/1 menace that is actually like pretty good and pretty annoying. And the nice thing is this thing isn't like capped, so in the late game you can just attack with this and just pump it a bunch and deal like 5 or something if you have a ton of mana. And that's a thing, and it attacks and deals like, you know, it just seems like a reasonable 1-drop. Nothing. I don't think this is as good as Gorehound, but I think it's fine. Like 1-drop menace is just something that is nice and like attacks and like does stuff, and like there's like there's stuff that cares about being unblocked or whatever. Maybe I should move this down a little bit because it is kind of just like a 1-drop, and you could just play something else, and you probably will in a lot of spots. I should probably move this down. Because when I first saw this, I thought, and I regraded it to it, I was like, oh, you care about your opponent losing life. It's like, no, it actually only cares about your life total changing. Like your there's the red-black deck. I don't really believe in that deck though, but this card is probably good in that deck. If that deck is functional, this is a card that you're going to want in that deck. All right, I'll leave it here then. I'm not jazzed about it, but this is fine. Rottenmouth Viper, 5 in a black for a 6/6. As an additional cost to cast it, you may sacrifice any number of non-land permanents. Spell costs 1 less to cast for each permanent sacrifice this way. Whenever it enters or attacks, put a blight counter on it. Then for each blight counter on it, each opponent loses 4 life, unless that player sacrifices a permanent or discarded card. So obviously this is really good when it does stuff. You don't really want to be sacrificing permanents to make this cheaper unless you have food, and then you have like a synergy with the food. But like if you do, it's fine. And then like it ETBs makes your opponent probably discard a card to lose 4. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's fine. I think it's good. It's a good threat. It's big. Whatever. I don't. There's ways to recur it a bunch. So that's a thing, I guess. The fact that it's 6 mana, I mean, it's probably more like 5 mana. I don't know. To me, it just kind of reads like big, dumb creature, for the most part. Like, when it attacks, obviously, that's really good. And then you get two triggers when it attacks. So, like, if it gets to attack, it's really, really good. But how often is that going to happen? I mean, maybe this is just the same as the 4/2 from OTJ Marauder, Knight of Flying, or like ATBs, they discard a card. But this they can just lose 4 though. Now 4 is more than 3, which is what this ability usually is, and it is starting to get to the point where it's like that's a lot of damage. But just the fact that in some game states your opponent can be like, "Yep, take 4," and just like not care, that that's why I'm putting this in tier 2, but maybe it'll come back to bite me. Maybe I'll be seen as too harsh. Maybe it'll be too harsh of a grade at the end of the day. Ruthless Negotiation. Single black mana for a sorcery. Target opponent exiles a card from their hand. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, you draw a card. And it's flashback for 4 black. So it's a 1-mana sorcery. Make them discard 1 card. You're trading 1 for their worst card. That's not terrible. Again, there's kind of a sub-theme of discarding stuff. I don't think that's bad. And then for 5, later on in the game, the thing about this card is it forces your opponents to play in ways that aren't good for them, It's kind of as like Hopeless Nightmare in some ways, where like you play it on 1, your opponent discards a card, you're like pretty happy about that. Then later on in the game, you just sacrifice it. Now, Hopeless Nightmare is probably better than this because the bargain is like a thing, but I don't know, like just having the threat of I can, like, if you go down to 1 card in hand, I'm gonna get your last card and draw a card with this in the late game is strong to me. Like, that reads as like being sort of strong, and like it is a 3-for-1. Like, at the end of the day, this is like a 3-for-1. It's 6 total mana, but one of those mana is on turn 1 likely, which means that you're like you're kind of just like getting an extra mana because you get to spend your mana on turn 1 while playing a card that is still impactful later on in the game. I don't know, maybe tier 2 is too high. I probably should move it down to tier 3. Because it is just a discard spell, pure discard spell. But I do like it a lot. Like, I like the card. But it's like, I guess that's the question is, like, am I actually going to take this over the 1 mana? I think this is so I guess it's like, do I think this is better than the 1/1 that draws you cards if you forage? And the answer is, like, I feel like they're pretty similar. So that makes me want to move this down then. I've been moving a lot of cards today. I've been doing a lot of, like, ooh, I'm changing my mind. I'm moving the card down. But I think I'm going to do that again. Yep, look, it's me. I'm going to move cards down a tier guy in black. I don't know. It is a lot of mana, and it is one of those cards. It's like, do you really want to play multiples of this? And it's like, no, not really. So it's like, can you actually value it that high? And it's like, probably not. So, yeah. I think we just have to move down. And if I'm wrong, that's fine. Happy to be wrong in the wrong direction. I'm not going to be wrong about this one. Savor. 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature gets -2/-2 until in return. Create a food token. Yeah, this card's sick, obviously. Any removal spell that makes material is good, and this is, -2/-2 is kind of like a tier 4 card by itself, but we kind of know the template, right? If your removal spell makes a piece of paper on the board and also removes something at instant speed, it's going to be a good card. The reason if this were -3/-3, I'd put it in tier 1. It's not, so I'm putting it in tier 2. It's still a great card. It's probably black's best removal spell, I would think. There are small creatures in the set, so, again, I think this is just going to be good. Scales of Shale. 2 and a black for an instant. The spell costs 1 less to cast for each lizard you control. Target creature you control gets +2/+0, lifelink, and indestructible. So, if you have lizards, obviously this is good. But without lizards, I don't think this is good enough, right? 3-mana instant +2/+0 lifelink indestructible is just not a good enough card. So if you have 1 lizard, this is probably fine at 2 mana. I'm sort of assuming that's where you're going to play it. Lifelink indestructible is pretty big. Like, that's a big swing, right? You get a lot of life. You keep your creature alive. You trade with your opponent. You get your opponent's creature for this card. That can be pretty good. So I think this is certainly good, but you definitely need some number of lizards. So you can't just play this in any black deck, I don't think, and expect it to be good. Scavenger's Talent. Single black mana for 8 class. Whenever one or more creatures you control die, create a food token. This ability triggers only once each turn. You can pay 1 and a black to go to level 2. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, target player mills 2 cards. And you can pay 2 and a black to go to say. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice 3 non-land permanents. If you do, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with the finality counter on it. So this is very expensive, and it's all time-gated and weird, and your stuff has to die to make the food tokens, which doesn't excite me, and I don't know. I'm sure there's like some crazy stuff you can do with this. It just doesn't. It's just not. I don't think that in the average deck you're going to want it, and I think it's pretty low priority for that reason. Season of Loss. 3 black for a sorcery. It's the paw print card, so you can choose 5 of them. So 1 is each player sacrifices a creature, 2 is draw a card for each creature you control that died this turn, and 3 is each opponent loses X life or X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So this is basically a Wrath on the front side of it, 5 mana Wrath, which I don't really like very much. But when your Wraths have any type of optionality at all, that's when they start to become very good. And there's just so many ways to break the parity on this. Like there's just like, and also you can like, this can just be a win con. This can just deal 5-6 damage to your opponent as like reach, like easily. And that's a thing that will happen a lot, and I think that is like the primary reason that this card's really good, is that it's a Wrath that also is a burn spell, which is really strong. And you can also just be like a Wrath that draws you cards, and like you don't. It's another Wrath that like you can, my type of card where like I can still develop to the board because this card's good when I'm ahead, it's good when I'm behind, it's good at every situation. This card's just always good, so I really like this card a lot. Sinister Monolith. 3 and a black for an artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And you can tap to pay 2 life to sacrifice it and draw 2 cards as a sorcery. So you're draining your opponent for, 1 a turn. How good is that? It's okay. It's fine, not for 4 mana. And then you have to sacrifice the thing to draw 2 and pay 2 life. So you play this, you let it go for a turn. You're basically drawing the cards for free. You're not losing any life. Let's say think of it as 4 mana, draw 2 cards. Your opponent loses 2 life. How good is that as a sorcery? It's not great, but this is a card that like it reads badly, but might play better than it reads. Where like you play this on turn 4, and your opponent just kind of is like, well, but like you can't. But like it, there's not a ton of artifact hate in the set, so like it's not whatever. I don't know. I am always concerned about because you're not going to want to draw the cards right away anyway, which is fine. Like you don't have to. You don't need to draw the cards on the turn you cast this because you're not going to have any mana left, which is again totally fine. That's not the piece that I'm worried about. The piece that I'm worried about is it just does nothing. Like it's just too small ball for 4 mana. I don't know. We'll see. I kind of hope this is good. It's kind of a cute card. It's kind of a card that I like that you can do stuff with, but for me, I'm not excited. Stargaze, X black for a sorcery. Look twice X cards from the top of your library. Put X cards from them into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. You lose X life. So, if you pay 3 mana, you get 1 card and get to look at 3 cards, or get to look at 2. That's atrocious. If you pay, so once you pay 5 mana, that's where you start getting like decent value on this. You get to draw 3 cards and look at the top 10 and look at the top 6. And you lose 3 life. I don't know. There's just other ways to do card advantage in black even, and I don't think this is going to be necessary. I think there's just better ways to do card advantage in black, and this is just, it's double pipped and all that. I don't think I'm going to play this basically. Starlit Soothsayer. Alright, tier 5 is too low for this, right? 2 and a black for a 2/2 flying. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, surveil 1. I'll move it up to tier 4. Fine. I was just cranky. Okay, I was just mad when I saw this card. Sometimes you just get mad. Sometimes you just rate cards low because you hate them and everything they stand for. But yeah, 3 mana 2/2 flyer is not very good. But there's a lot of things that gain or lose life, so you're going to be surveilling pretty much every turn, which is pretty good, and surveilling is good, and like you care about your graveyard and all that. So I'll relent a little bit, and not say it's unplayably bad. Starscape Cleric. 1 on a block for a 2/1 with flying. It can't block. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life, and you get an offspring for 2 and a black. So this card is sneaky bad, where it looks really all the text on it looks really good, and then you're like, oh, it can't block. So then I remember back, I'm like, okay, so 2 mana 2/1 flyer can't block. That was a card in Midnight Hunt, and it was bad, but you could play it. And this card is obviously a lot better than that card, but I don't know. So I originally had this in tier 2, and then I was like, oh, can't block is actually atrocious. And I was like, I remembered how bad it was to not be able to block with your 2-drop, and then I was like, oh, yeah, probably not the best. And it has 1 toughness, which again we talked about. There's some stuff that hates on that, not a ton, but some, and small. And its ability is good. The text on the card is good, but the stats and the can't block scares me a lot. So I don't know. I'm cool on this card, is what I would say. Thornplate Intimidator. 3 and a black for a 4/3 offspring 3. When this creature enters, target opponent loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. I don't know. I mean, it's a 4 mana 4/3, so 4 mana 4/3 is not very good. This like the Croxa text or whatever you call it. I don't know. Like I just don't like the Croxa text, is all I'm saying. Like, I just don't like that, like, oh, my opponent gets to choose the mode that is the least bad for me here. It's just like, I don't... Like, if they ever choose to lose 3 life, I don't know, 4 mana 4/3, deal 3 to your opponent is not great. 4 mana 4/3, opponent discards a card. That's a good card. 4 mana 4/3, target opponent sacrifices an online permanent. That's a good card, too. And you can get to 7. You know, I'm gonna move it up. I'm gonna move it up to tier 3. I'm all over the place on the black cards today. We move some down, we move some up. I'm just moving everything. I'm moving everything around because I don't know. I do like a once over before I record, and I'm like, do these grades look fine? And I'm like, they're fine. And then I like go through because I can always edit them because the OBS is nice and you can pause stuff. So I can always edit it while I'm doing it, which is always nice because the final ledger is what I keep in my sheet afterwards. So yeah, I mean, I think this is fine. Thought Stalker Warlock. 2 and a black for a 2/2 with menace. When it enters, choose target opponent. If they lost life this turn, reveal their hand. You choose an on-land card from it. They discard that card. Otherwise, they discard a card. So worst case scenario, 3 mana 2/2. Opponent discards a card. Menace, which is a good card, which is already basically a tier 2 card. And if you hit them, you're just thought seizing them for free. So that seems insane. I actually think this might see like standard play. Like, this seems good to me. Like, this just seems like a really good card in like a black aggro-y deck where you just you get in early, you play this card on turn 3, get to like thought seize them, and they're just gonna be really far behind. And it has menace, so plays well in multiples. I don't know. It just seems like a really strong uncommon to me. Valley Rock Caller. 1 and a black for a 1/3 menace. When it attacks, each opponent loses X life and gains X life, where X is the number of other squirrels, bats, lizards, or rats you control. So we looked at the common earlier that was like this, but just drained them for 1. I think there's enough of these creature types that this is essentially that, but better because it has menace, so it can attack more often. So I've graded it a tier higher, and it can drain for more. So I think that's kind of my evaluation of this card is. I think that the 2 mana 1/3 that drains for 1 is okay. I think this card is better than that card, and as a result, I've graded it a tier higher. Wix Patrol. 4 black for a 5/3. Mill 3 cards. When you do, target creature an opponent controls gets -X until end of turn, where X is the greatest mana value among cards in your graveyard. So this is I actually could put this into tier 1. This is like the mythic from Brothers War that like exile the card from your graveyard, creature gets -X equal to that, make cards mana value. This is better than that card, actually. If it doesn't do it when it dies, that card obviously did it twice, so you're getting a 3 for 1. This card, I mean, this is good. Like, this is a really good card. The question is, should I just put it in tier 1 and like get it over with? Maybe I should. It is 6 mana. I don't know. So putting 6 mana cards up that high always scares me because it's like, man, it really. And this does do the thing. This really does do it, but like, it can kind. It doesn't really miss. Like, you're gonna have a 4 mana card in your graveyard, and dealing 4 is. Yeah, I'm just gonna put this in tier 1. I'm gonna after the episode, I'm gonna put it in tier 1 because the last card is Wick the World Mind. 3 and a black for a 2/4. When it or another rat enters, you create a 1/1 snail if you don't control a snail. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on a snail you control. So 3 mana 2/4, make a 1/1. The other ability, like, you could maybe activate. I don't know. I'm not worried about it. It's like 3 colors of mana, and the fixing's not great. So otherwise, you put a +1/+1 counter on the snail. So it's 3 mana 2/4, makes a 1/1. Whenever you play a rat, the 1/1 gets bigger. You can sacrifice the snail to like do other stuff. Cool, whatever. It's doing stuff. It's great. Just makes tokens. Just a strong card, obviously, by itself. Just multiple bodies for 4, and we're happy with that. And then back to this thing, I will change this to be tier 1. And that's it. That's it for black. We got through all the black cards. My verdict is they are better than the blue cards. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I don't know. A lot of tier changes today. A lot of reading the cards a second time and being like, actually, I think I disagree with my own take from the past. But that's good. That's why we do these. It's good to do these, talk through the cards, get some insights on how I think they're gonna be and all that. And see you next time.